Jumatatu mpaka Ijumaa, moja kwa moja kutoka VOA Swahili, Washington.
Hello, I'm Esther Githu. It's Monday, December 12th. This is Africa 54.
Nigeria's army strongly denies a Reuters report alleging its soldiers massacred children during its anti-Islamist insurgent operations. The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit starts Tuesday, hopefully matching U.S. support for African entrepreneurs and initiatives. VOA's Mariama Diallo details upcoming events. Africa's pounding the Qatar bleachers in victory after Morocco downed Portugal 1-0 on Saturday. We'll hear the shouts of joy. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
We begin in West Africa, where the Nigerian army massacred children in its war against Islamist insurgents in the country's northeast, according to more than 40 soldiers and civilians who said they witnessed the military kill children or saw children's corpses after a military operation. Soldiers and armed guards employed by the government told Reuters that army commanders repeatedly ordered them to, quote, delete children because they were assumed to be collaborating with Boko Haram militants or its Islamic State offshoot, or to have inherited the tainted blood of insurgent fathers. Nigerian military leaders told Reuters the army has never targeted children for killing. They said that the reporting in this article is an insult to Nigerians and part of a foreign effort to undermine the country's fight against the insurgents.
Yes, at times when we come into a place and we find children and adults, we kill them all, shoot them all. We don't differentiate and say this is a child and this is an adult, because they're all together. At times, if you kill the adult, the child will become a problem. At times it doesn't feel good, and then other times you see an 8-year-old boy holding a bomb, or other times those kids loading ammunition, a 6 or 7-year-old who was taught how to load ammunition into a magazine or a gun. So you see, they start to become bad eggs.
This is something that everyone knows. It's not just our commanders. Most people say the same, and they heard it from the mouths of our soldiers, saying that if we let them grow up, if they're born and they grow up, it will be with that ideology, Boko Haram's ideology. Because their parents are Boko Haram. It's too late and the blood has already reacted in their bodies. They will grow up that way. That's why whoever asks them, they will say that's why they kill. There's a saying in Hausa, if you kill a snake but you don't kill its young, there will be more battle ahead. They say that if you kill the parents but you don't kill them, they will grow up with that ideology, and that ideology will be even stronger than their parents.
Not in Nigeria, not in Nigeria. We're cultural, we're communal here, so everybody respects life. We respect families, we respect women and children. We respect every living soul. I mean, if we could take the terrorists that have surrendered and treat them well, why should we go after their children? For what? They are Nigerians, they are human beings. So we're duty-bound to take them and treat them as human beings, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Some of the soldiers told Reuters media that they are tormented by their involvement in the killing of civilians and children, especially the very young. In Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a 55-year-old Tutsi woman fears she will be killed if she spoke under her real name. She fled to the city last week after a militia leader known as General Janvier, an opponent of the Tutsi-led M23 rebel group, arrived in her town of Kishanga. She and residents of her poor neighborhood of Goma said they saw children with machetes and guns, saying they would come to kill the Tutsis. The M23 has advanced across North Kivu province in recent weeks, winning victories over the army and forcing hundreds of thousands to flee in its wake. The Democratic Republic of Congo accuses its smaller neighbor Rwanda of backing the M23, something UN experts and US officials agree with, although Kigali denies it. Many assume that Tutsis support the M23 or perceive them as Rwandan implants rather than native Congolese. The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit kicks off Tuesday in Washington, where President Joe Biden will host about 50 African leaders, their delegations and Africans in the private sector and diaspora communities here in the United States. VOA correspondent Mariama Diallo sat down with the Dean of the African Diplomatic Corps in Washington and filed this report.
Serge Mambouli is the Republic of Congo's ambassador to the United States and the Dean of the African Diplomatic Corps. He told VOA that he's been working with White House and State Department officials for months preparing for the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit.
Our expectation is that first, the cooperation must be strengthened between individual African countries and the United States on the bilateral level, and also on the continental level between Africa and the United States. We want this summit to be also the contribution for the United States to the success of the Agenda 2063 of the African Union.
Agenda 2063 prioritizes inclusive social and economic development, continental and regional integration, democratic governance, and peace and security to reposition the continent as a dominant player in the global arena, the African Union says.
We, Africa, we need energy, we need infrastructure, we need financing, and we need the good health to develop Africa. So if this summit can contribute to the cooperation and to the realization of our cooperation between the United States in those sectors, mainly, and including other sectors, that will help a lot.
President Barack Obama convened the first U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in 2014. Since then, a lot has happened. Jude Moore, Senior Policy Fellow at the Center for Global Development, says this year's summit comes at a crucial time.
On the African side, they will be expecting the U.S. to take a position on some of the issues that are now confronting the continent: inflation, fuel, the war in Ukraine and the impact on lives and livelihoods. But more importantly, this is going to come after COP27. And African leaders are going to be looking to the U.S. for leadership in responding to the climate crisis.
Last year, a UN report on Africa's climate found the continent was heating up more and faster than other regions in the world. Yet Africa is responsible for less than 4% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Mambouli addressed the needs of the Congo Basin Blue Fund, an effort to help the region's countries to rely less on forest-based resources.
For instance, in Congo Basin, in a Blue Fund within Congo Basin, that need to be funded if we have to continue to protect the planet on our side. Promises have been made by different countries, but we haven't seen any deep pocket action.
The Congo Basin is home to some of the largest tropical rainforests in the world. On governance, Africa has recently seen recurring coups, mainly in the West African states of Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso, some of the countries that were not invited to the summit.
It's a really, really difficult time. So I imagine that African governments will come looking for more assistance from the United States on the security part. Because, you know, they can impose sanctions, right? But it's not just a stick. You have to be able to offer a carrot. And in most instances, the institutions simply do not have as much resources to be able to offer the carrot.
The summit opens on Tuesday and ends on Thursday. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
Observers say the African diaspora is a powerful asset for the development of the continent through investment, trade, innovation, remittances, and much more. Derek Kayongo is an entrepreneur and human rights innovator whose initiative, the Global Soap Project, helped provide much-needed soap and hygiene to vulnerable communities worldwide. The 2011 CNN hero and human rights advocate launched Africa Mbele, a U.S.-based organization aiming to mobilize the diaspora to contribute to Africa's development. The organization is hosting its annual Global Transparency Day at the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts on the sidelines of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit under the theme, A New Movement to Recover, Invest, and build the future Africa. VOA's Leno Mudu spoke to Kayongo about his work and vision to further engage the African diaspora's contribution in the development of the continent.
I decided as a human being, as Derek Kayongo, that I was not going to tolerate the things that I saw around me, that I was going to do something about it. And even though it was one little small thing, as small as an ant, I knew that the power of ants is in volume, in numbers, that I would do my part. So that's what really got me to build the Global Soap Project. I saw a lot of Western hotels. The hotel industry in the US throws away about 800 million bars of soap every year, which is about 2.6 million bars of soap every single day. And where does that soap go? It goes into the landfills and makes us sick. On juxtaposition, we have 2 million kids that die every year to poor hygiene. And now we have COVID. And the first line of defense against COVID is hand washing. Before you do immunization and all that stuff and vaccines, wash your hands. So I found my work very relevant and is still relevant till today. And then I moved, yes, you're right, into the civil rights area because I was, my forerunner in the US was John Lewis, but he was a civil rights leader and he began as a young man. So that's what made me and led me to that particular work.
What have you identified in terms of the priority when it comes to the need of your community that is fueling your work?
The first one was, of course, to recycle soap. I then realized that it is just a placebo or it's a Band-Aid. We have very many vestiges. We have malaria, we have poor roads, we have bad water. But at the end of the day, is Africa going to really develop with the level of corruption that we are faced with? It is estimated that every year we lose $1 trillion every year that leaves that continent. Now, if you give Africa back to the leaders that really care and love their people, $1 trillion every year, which is more than international aid, by the way. Can you imagine what we would do? This issue of corruption, extreme corruption, because there's corruption all over the world, but extreme, dilapidating corruption is going to stop Africa from developing up to the next 100 years.
How can you make a significant impact when it comes to tackling corruption? As you, an individual, Derek Kayongo, what are you doing?
We have to think about building a movement. The first thing to think about in building a movement is the diaspora. We're the only people in the diaspora who are free. I mean, we are Americans now, we are Canadians, we are Brits, that can actually say something about extreme corruption. The one thing that we have to do first is to educate, mobilize, agitate, and then get our diaspora to advocate for policies from our governments now, our new governments, our American government, to really speak to this issue of extreme dilapidating corruption.
You recently launched Africa Mbele. It's a US-based international organization mobilizing the diaspora. What are you hoping to accomplish?
There are a lot of multinational corporations that do business on our continent that don't pay taxes, and if they do pay taxes, they underpay taxes, or they negotiate deals with our governments that do not pay the right price for our commodities. And then we have banks that have opened their doors to allow this kleptocratic money to flow out of our continent, we call wealth flight. And when the money shows up in these Western banks, it benefits the people in those countries. So the transparency of these banks, the transparency of these corporations, and then the kleptocrats, we have to really figure out a way to identify where that money is, once we identify that money, then to really figure out a way to re-engage that money. Asset recovery then is followed by building a fund to actually invest in what we call infrastructure development. We're talking about highways to connect our continent. We're talking about communication. We're talking about healthcare systems.
The U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, your organization, Africa Mbele, is hosting a gala at the Kennedy Center under the theme, a new movement to recover, invest, and build the future Africa. What is the purpose of the event?
To be part of that particular summit and speak to the issue of kleptocracy and corruption. We want to make sure, Lena, that African mothers and fathers we left back home don't see us driving Benzes and Bentleys out here as if we have our homes set. We need to do something, and we need to speak up.
That was VOA's Lino Mudu speaking with Derek Kayongo, a human rights advocate and the founder of Africa Mbele. Kenyan-born Nelly Cheboy is CNN's 2022 Hero of the Year. She was honored for her efforts in providing computer training for rural Kenya school children through her non-profit Tech Lead Africa. Cheboy, who grew up in grinding poverty in rural Kenya, came to the United States on a full scholarship at Augustana College in Chicago, Illinois, where she says she studied computer science and found her career path. Online voters selected Cheboy as the top winner from a field of 10 heroes. She said she knew there were children in Kenya who had no idea what a computer was, and so Tech Lead Africa was born. Her students learn a variety of skills, including computer skills, coding, graphic design, and marketing. 3 years ago, scientists in Wuhan, China, first reported infections from a novel coronavirus. Since then, the world has developed and delivered 13 billion shots against COVID-19. It is an unprecedented achievement, but it has been tarnished by unequal access. VOA Steve Baragona has a look at the global COVID vaccine drive as a pandemic blamed for more than 6.5 million deaths enters its fourth year.
February 24th, 2021, a delivery of COVID-19 vaccines arrives in Ghana, striking a blow for vaccine equity.
We're really happy because they're going to benefit a large number of beneficiaries in Ghana. Ghana is the first country to receive the COVAX vaccines.
The UN-backed COVAX program aimed to help low and middle-income countries get access to COVID vaccines after rich countries had locked down most of the early supplies. The program struggled to compete for limited doses. After nearly 2 billion shots delivered, COVAX is narrowing its scope to serve the poorest countries. That's in part because 2 years later, there are plenty of shots available. Not everyone is getting them, however, says Duke University Global Health Professor Krishna Udaikumar.
The inequities really are stark and continued. In Africa, only 25% of the population of the entire continent is fully vaccinated, compared with more than 75% in places like South America.
Supply is not the biggest problem anymore. Demand is. People in lower-income countries are not lining up for COVID shots, says Center for Global Development health expert Janine Madan-Keller.
This lack of demand is really a concerning trend we're seeing. The reasons behind low demand, I'd say, are quite complex and multifaceted.
Misinformation about the vaccines is rampant. Trust in governments providing the shots is low, and many people in lower-income countries don't see COVID as much of a threat. Plus, the vaccines took too long to arrive, Udaikumar says.
While there was demand, it was unmet. So it's reasonable now that we're seeing more hesitancy because we missed the time when everybody was ready to accept and take vaccines.
Much of the delay was because vaccine manufacturing is concentrated in a few, mostly wealthier nations. Poorer nations were left hoping for handouts, says Brown University Pandemic Center Director Jennifer Nuzzo.
I think we have to figure out how to make these vaccines in a much more distributed way than we did before, so we aren't just relying on donations. It's clear donations do not work because when faced with a crisis, countries will always choose to prioritize their own populations.
Efforts are underway to build more vaccine factories in Africa, but building them is just the start. How to keep them in business in the long run is another question, Keller says.
Who's going to buy these vaccines, or what vaccines make sense, both from an economic but also from a health perspective for these manufacturers to produce? Where will the money to pay for them come from?
The African Union faces these questions as it aims to manufacture 60% of its routine vaccines on the continent by 2040. The challenge is to build a sustainable vaccine industry that can handle both regular vaccines and the inevitable next pandemic. Steve Baragona, VOA News.
In other news, a Libyan man accused of making the bomb that killed 270 people after it blew up Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988 is in custody in the United States, according to Scottish and U.S. law enforcement officials. Guinea's former dictator, Moussa Dadis Camara, has denied responsibility for a massacre at a political rally in a Conakry stadium in September 2009. He took the stand on Monday at the trial of officials implicated in the killings. Camara is facing charges of personal criminal responsibility and command responsibility. Amnesty International urges Senegal to act forcefully to protect students. The organization reports that tens of thousands of students known as talibés in Senegal's Quranic schools face multiple abuses as well as financial exploitation through forced begging. Africa is celebrating Morocco's historic win against Portugal in this year's World Cup Games. VOA's Sunday Shamari has this report.
Morocco produced the latest Qatar 2022 surprise, beating the European heavyweights Portugal 1-0 and booked their place in the semis for the first time for an African nation. There was dancing, singing and waving of flags while drivers honked their horns as they drove through the streets of Doha. The Atlas Lions make a big roar, and this North African team has shown superb discipline as the dark horse of this tournament so far. After the final whistle, Morocco players tossed their coach in the air and waved their country's flag as they linked arms in front of celebrating fans. The fans in and around Doha became ecstatic as they celebrated the historic win against Europe heavyweights Portugal, a team that was heavily favored to win the encounter. On the other hand, heartbreak and disbelief surrounded Portugal fans around the world as the Atlas Lions became victorious as they cruised to the World Cup semi-finals in Doha, Qatar. It was Morocco's Youssef and Nessiri's header above Portugal defenders and goalkeeper Diogo Costa that gave the Atlas Lions their first ever ticket to the semi-finals of the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Morocco fans who traveled to Doha from Morocco in Souk Waqif were very excited with this historic win. They were jumping and chanting as they waved their red flags all night in Doha.
Morocco's a great team, yeah, they have a solid defense, and I don't think France is going to get through that. Morocco's going to go all the way to the final.
Morocco is enjoying a lot of support from so many fans who have traveled from around the world to support them, especially from all neighboring Middle Eastern countries. So they have a large number of supporters in this tournament, and it feels like home when they play. Ahmed Ali is from Kenya and also a resident of Qatar. He says what has happened is pride of Africa.
I feel something like we have achieved. It's a big achievement for Morocco, you see. I think it's the first time for African nation to go up high, like semi-finals. So that's what makes every African or every Arab pride. Yeah, we have, Morocco have a very good team. They have a very good team. They play with unity. They have everything. They're defending well. They are playing counter-attacking football, which makes them a dangerous team to play. You understand, right? So today, before the game, there was a lot of Morocco people here. Like they've been asking, who do you think is gonna win? I was telling them, it's Morocco have they have a potential to win, to beat Portugal. Portugal have a good squad. They have Ronaldo, they have Bruno, they have good defense. Pepe. Yeah, this team, Portugal, the Portuguese have been always good. But Morocco today, they deserve better because of the unity. They play like, they play together. That's what makes Morocco dangerous now. And they are going now to the semi-finals. Anything can happen. Since they can beat team like Portugal's, they can easily beat France or anyone who comes on their way.
Morocco's miraculous win is celebrated all over Africa and Arab world as the fans believe they can keep going The only goal they conceded in this tournament is their own goal, showing they have a strong defense. Young Moroccan fans, Vitar and Ahmed, were very excited with this win.
It's like the first Arab and African country to go to the semi-finals, and we are very happy. And Viva Maghreb!
Morocco's squad is coached by Walid Regragui, and they made an impact after topping a group that included the second-ranked Belgium and fellow semi-finalist Croatia. Morocco will play France Tuesday in a semi-final showdown.
That was VOA Sunday Shomari reporting. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.
The United States remains committed to the Cuban people in their pursuit of freedom, prosperity, and a future with greater dignity. We are focused on the political and economic well-being of the Cuban people and center our efforts on democracy and human rights and fundamental freedoms. In July of 2021, the world witnessed tens of thousands of Cubans across the island take to the streets to peacefully demand freedom. We recognize the challenges the Cuban people face. The people of the United States and U.S. organizations donate a significant amount of humanitarian goods to the Cuban people, and the United States is one of Cuba's principal trading partners. We join international partners in urging the Cuban government to release political prisoners immediately and unconditionally and protect the freedoms of expression and peaceful assembly of all individuals in Cuba.